Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll begin this study group of reflective studies. This is in preparation for some research we're doing for an essay we're writing currently. And the material and inputs we're getting from the study group and the follow-up we'll be having after the study group with all the participants
Mm-hmm.
will be used in the essay we'll be writing, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll be sharing um the details of it once the study group is over, and how we'll go about getting more feedback from you. And we'll be giving credits for every individual who gives us inputs during uh, the feedback session also. So we'll get down to the questions for today. The first question is self-reflection possible? If yes, what are the methods you use to self-reflect?
Okay.
So the question is whether self-reflection is possible at all. And what does one mean by self-reflection? What does that process entail?
Okay. So self-reflection in terms of a persona or in terms of one's work, or do you think everything?
In terms of whoever you consider yourself to be.
Okay. So I would like to look at it in terms of two, because it's like, there's this distinction of the image, that there's this idea called the image that you create of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that the image is something that is constantly changed with the other kinds of
Hello.
images of you. Can you hear me?
One sec. Yeah, I think someone's trying to join. Ooh.
Okay.
Hello? Yeah, hi. We can't actually see where you've joined from. We can't see you yet. Right, right.
Okay, we can see Dhruv. Yeah, Dhruv is here.
Yeah.
Yes,
Certainly.
yes, certainly. We've started. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sure, sure, sure. Aditya, go on.
Okay, I was just saying that the idea of the self-reflection is also the idea of the image that you generate of yourself,
Yeah.
and the possibility of the reconfiguration that this image goes through in relation to the uh, uh, I would say, even go to say that the images that the outside generates of you. So
Right.
there is an idea of your own personal image of what you have, and the image of what you are being perceived as.
Right.
So
Aditya, but isn't the creation of these perceptions itself a self-reflection?
no, that's what I was arriving at actually, where
Sorry.
it is in the constant negotiation of these two images is where the self-reflection arrives.
Mm-hmm.
Because somewhere one is trying to seep into it, whether to produce a self-reflection that is generated by, at least psychologically, by yourself, or a reflection of circumstances, external stimuli gives you in terms of the image of what other people think of you or perceive of you, and things like that. No, there is this famous saying that the image of you only actual image of you only arrives into the world once you're dead, no?
Right.
Right,
That,
but that's a different issue altogether. We are talking of how one is able to self-reflect not just as an image, but even on, say, one's ongoing being and the actions that are taking place.
A
How do
part
you
of
self-reflect?
a part of your question seems to be, is it even possible? And
Yes,
and
yes, yeah.
And I think I would argue it's not, especially because any construction of what you think of yourself that you form will always be in something of a third person. Even if you try and articulate your own actions through a lens, it'll only always be comparative.
But isn't that still a process of self-reflection? Isn't that still a being trying to look at itself?
Trying to, but
yeah, trying to.
Yeah, but necessarily creating an abstract idea of another entity to look at.
So you're saying just that even the act of looking at yourself is not possible because what is the self is undefined.
Yeah, you'll always have to define it as opposed to what is doing the looking.
What if I ask you if certain degrees of it is possible? I mean, we're not looking at an absolute yes or no. Is it possible?
I suppose it would be easier to define it on a gradation rather than an absolute.
Yeah. Because so Dhruv, it seems so you are questioning whether it's possible for us to consider ourselves at all, right?
Yeah. Without creating a different entity called ourselves, which is separate from whatever entity is looking at it.
What we consider as ourselves and what we are actually ourselves are two different things. That's what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's about the mirror looking at itself. Self-reflection means, is the mirror looking at itself or is the mirror looking at another mirror?
That's more tricky. But isn't self-reflection also a practice that happens in retrospect? Do you think self-reflection is something that happens like on an everyday basis, or do you think then you call it a self-reflection in that same spirit? You know, for example, the practice of writing diary is in a way for the longest time a self-reflection of almost your everyday. But I don't know whether you call that a self-reflection in the same potency or way. Because you're literally reflecting your activities of how you, it's not writing down your activities, but it's basically about how you approach those activities and a kind of a reflection of how you operated.
So you're trying to observe yourself.
Yeah. And consciously record it in a way.
Yeah. And you're observing your past self in probably the hopes of creating an image of the current self or whatever.
Absolutely.
I somehow feel that reflection happens all the time, and the question is if the self can accept its reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was also leading to that question of the difference between reflection and self-reflection, because I understand that reflection happens after something is formed, an event, an image, and with something that is continuously being formed, the reflection is also going to be in a state of change. So, getting back to Dhruv's point of whether it is possible at all, I guess it is, but how much are you actually reflecting when you're being in that change or that state of...
And how much of it is a reflection of self rather than everything else that you interact with?
Yes.
And how much of it is the trying to form an image of yourself rather than actually reflecting upon yourself?
So it's more construction than reflection, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be a very fine line.
So does it matter what it is actually, as long as, like Ritika said, it is something we can accept as ourselves?
If you're able to accept it, then perhaps that's fine. But there could be a case where you're unable to, if you're a perfectionist, for example, and you're just not able to accept that this is myself. I can do this better. I can construct myself better. Or I can understand myself better.
So how does one do it? Like, what what methods can one use to do something like that? Like somebody mentioned writing a diary, but that is a tangible method. Other than a tangible method, are there other approaches?
So you are asking how is it possible to actually arrive at a knowledge of who we are, right?
No, I think
I mean, because
not a knowledge of who you are, but because that's again too definitive. I'm asking if there are methods used to just get the self-reflection going.
I think one needs
how
to
do you get it going?
identify a surface, I would say, for being able to perceive the reflection. So some sort of a surface. It could be a person who acts as your mirror. It could be another self in yourself who acts as your mirror. So I thought I could call it just a surface. So we need to identify a self surface for reflection, for self-reflection, maybe.
Yeah. Because constantly this theme of looking at yourself in a mirror, that's what's happening. Like a surface, the mirror is a surface.
Yeah, and then the surface mirror tends to be people we know, people we want to impress, people who impress us maybe. So it's again trying to find what reflection do we write, right? And what, going back to the original of does the self like the reflection?
Right. Like if I don't, if I'm interacting with somebody and the way they're responding to me, I'm not happy with that. Is that a reflection of me or is it a reflection of them? And it might be giving clues of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Of who I am.
So, you know, it's also like the projections, right? Who's projecting onto whom?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also what is being projected?
Also, there's a distinct, especially in a conversation, there'll be a distinction between reflecting on a conversation and responding to it, sort of responding to stimulus in real time and then reflecting on it after some time has elapsed. Even if it's a very, very short amount of time, you would still need it to happen have the event that you're reflecting on happen in history rather than happen in immediate time.
Right, like you said, even if it's happening in a current interaction, that response time is still there. So I can reflect on the response and decide to tone down myself. But there is still a past in it.
Yeah, so it's more a construction of you're trying to create a story in your head as you reflect and then make sense of it,
but
rather than immediately respond to.
Is the self-reflection then following that is a moment of finding some resolution with yourself?
More than resolution, I would argue it's more of a meaningful narrative, like a continuous story that still makes sense as long as you add these new pieces to it.
Yeah, it's like making sense of things as you reflect upon. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, as long as it sort of fits the narrative that you're comfortable with up to that point.
Okay.
And maybe it's not resolution. Maybe there's a component of resolution, but also maybe a component of asking questions about yourself. What questions are arising?
But my only point is the moment of self-reflection is triggered by a particular event. And because it's not an everyday, of course you reflect, but you're not conscious that you're reflecting.
So you're saying that it's not possible to spontaneously reflect.
No, it is possible to spontaneously reflect, but either it's a response to a psychological or a physical event that you're suddenly responding to it because something occurs to you. So what I'm saying is there is a stimulant that actually will make you to reflect upon the self. It is happening that you're sitting somewhere and you're like reflecting on yourself. That's not, I don't think that's always the possibility. It is the possibility. But there is always a stimulant that actually takes you back to that. Maybe perhaps it's a meaningful thing for me to reflect on these aspects of how things went at this moment.
Right. I would agree with that because if the brain uses its space to constantly self-reflect while acting, that would seem inefficient to me.
Yeah.
It's like you're mired in self-doubt or something.
Yeah.
It'll be very
like
dishonest, I would say.
Sorry.
I think we're always reflecting ourselves. Sometimes when we are honestly reflecting, that those are the times when we are like seriously thinking on it, thinking on whatever the past was, and when we are in a conversation, I think we are also reflecting, but it's a little less honest. We just, I mean, yeah, we just, I think we are always reflecting. We always represent whatever we have reflected, or we always, yeah, I think we are always reflecting ourselves.
Yeah, I would agree with you that I mean, because what Aditya proposed as a trigger, but also you agreed the spontaneous reflection. But I think the trigger and the spontaneous reflection are opposed to each other. And like Abhay is saying, I would say that we are such self-conscious operators that we are at any given point really aware of how what we are doing is adding on or taking away from our narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So
but you would have to be conscious of a narrative that you want to add to in a very specific sort of a way.
But my only point is there that kind of conscious understanding of what the narrative is? Of course, I understand there is a composite understanding of what the self is, and at least your perception of what your self is. But in terms of what I'm trying to say is that whether the everyday experience or the regular experience that you have has the same kind of potency with which you analyze or reflect upon yourself is what I'm trying to say. Or you reflect upon the moment. Whether this is an event that happens rarely, or do you think it has an everyday role to it?
I think it has everyday role to it. It really depends on how you see it. If you just accept it as you're reflecting, whatever you're doing, you're learning, and that's why you're reflecting. And yeah, I mean, I have come to a point where I would say that everything I do, everything I hear, everything I listen, I reflect to it. My reaction itself would be something like a reflection.
But I think it's a very subjective process, this self-reflection. I mean, there might be people like who self-reflect a lot and then respond to every stimulus that they get, and there might be some people who just like don't reflect at all and they just like react to everything that they receive. So I think it's a very individual thing.
But would there be a distinction between reacting after self-reflection and then you're reacting after greater self-reflection and then reacting spontaneously? Or are there simply variations of reaction time? And all of them have some amount of self-reflection involved in them since you're conscious of your own person?
I think, I didn't understand the last part. It was too fast for me. But the first part, I think if you are self-reflecting, I think that is, that would be a response. It wouldn't be a reaction. I don't know. I see like reaction as something which is spontaneous, that doesn't involve any thinking process, just like a knee-jerk reaction. That's how I saw a reaction as. But if you are reflecting on something and then giving your response, that's more of a thoughtful response.
Yeah. So transitioning to our second question for the day from here, because let's say we all agree that there is some kind of self-reflection that is possible.
Okay.
So there's some conception of self-reflection that everyone can accept that it occurs. So if I would invite you to reflect on the question whether everyone should be a parent.
Sorry, everyone should.
You reflect on
Everyone should be a parent.
whether everyone should be a parent, and then we'll also reflect on that from the position of our parents. So now it's more of a thought experiment. It's not that we actually want to delve with the question of parenthood, but as a possibility, if I invite you to reflect on this, how would it be for you?
Maybe each one of us round the room can answer this question in a few sentences as our parent and as ourselves.
Yes. So the question, of course, takes into consideration whether, because the parenthood is about, it's a process where you come into existence or you bring someone else into existence. So if you don't, for example, agree that parenthood is essentially a process that everyone should perform, then how do you then question your own existence, and how do you negotiate with that?
I see parenthood not necessarily as something that is responsible for bringing an entity into being, but also, but instead I see it as, I am not a parent, but I see a parent as being somebody who has the ability to nurture. So I can assume the role of a parent for somebody.
So, but then if you now think from your own parents' perspective, and how would your response change then?
I think the response would be a little more definite, that it is definitely a valuable journey to be a parent, especially for somebody who has given birth to children, their offspring. So I think my parents would definitely vouch for that. It's quite different from the way I think.
Right. So, I mean, in your reflection, you are able to distance your own position from the position that brought you into existence. I mean, for you, that's not necessarily a conflict.
Yeah, it's not a conflict. And I will say that specifically from my gender point of view, also being a woman who can potentially mother or give birth to another being, I still feel that that biological process is not necessary to feel or understand an idea of parenthood.
Okay.
So, any other responses? any other Nils would like to take up the thought experiment?
It's difficult to. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think like reflecting on parenthood, I think like being vulnerable to like more perspectives, I would say, and creating a surface through these self-reflections. I don't know if it makes sense, but the thing is, just being like open, putting yourself among a new viewpoints, and then trying to like further understand yourself through your reflection, because like your children are also can be seen as like your reflection, right? Because your genetic code translates to your children, so in a way they're also your image.
Yeah.
But what is the
sorry.
of that position that you?
What becomes genetic code? Like a genetic code can also be affected by environment.
But I think
Right.
if we stick with the genetic, the nature part, where there are some patterns which repeat, right? Like our parents may have some patterns, and we might identify the same patterns within
Right.
ourselves because we see them. So if we only stick with that part, maybe Uttam, if you could stick with just that part, and what do you think?
Think in terms of like the same question, like what
Yeah.
my thoughts on
Continue.
parenthood.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add after someone else's viewpoint. I mean, I think I need a little bit of time to think on this.
Okay.
I think there is enough variation between generations, despite a large chunk of the genetic code repeating, that every individual is essentially an independent entity. It doesn't matter if the parent's point of view wouldn't matter unless it is vehemently imposed upon the other individual.
Right. So
using just the genetic code, there's nothing inside the genetic code that will create the compulsion to become a parent for the offspring. It would have to come from nurture and other social considerations.
So it's not a self-replicating code, you're saying?
No, it isn't. It has the possibility of it is not a self-replicating code, definitely not. But it has possibility of replication.
Right.
But in that way, like every person or every living creature has like cell division happening every day, right? So are we parents of ourselves?
But there isn't enough mutation that happens when you have a mitotic cell division. It just splits and then it duplicates the DNA code.
Right.
So there is more.
What about? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's more of a cloning process than a reproduction process, because you don't have two distinct bits of code that get combined.
Right.
Uttam, I was going to ask, how do you reflect on the same question from your own parents' point of view?
From my own parents' point of view, I think like they understand this thing in like a very abstract sense. They might not look at parenthood the same way I see. I mean, like I tend to look at things in a more scientific or a technical perspective, and they try to look at things in a more poetic or philosophical perspective. And for some things, like they say, oh, it's the maybe like sometimes they say it's God, sometimes they say it's nature, and sometimes they say science. So it's like a more mixed thing. But I tend to look more in terms of like science and nature. I mean, metaphysical of sorts. I would say they would look at things in that way.
Okay.
But as Dhruv was saying that this is, parenthood is an aspect that would depend more on social and cultural factors. That's the reason why we chose the thought experiment, because we feel it's a very polarizing question, because the way we have phrased it with a should. So, is there a particular imperative on us that makes it a question of should, or is it a which side of the polar perspective would you place yourself on? How would you give yourself the choice or not?
Whether to be a parent or not?
Yeah.
I mean, like, is like with, do you talking about like biological parent, or are you just talking about like adopting
Well, whatever
children?
your idea of parenthood
Whatever
would be.
your idea of parenthood is, that not being important, because the performance of the role is basically the known.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I think, in my opinion, like parenthood is a desire to perfect, like a better image of yourself. I think that's what parenthood is. I mean, there is one image that you see when you self-reflect, and I mean, because like time keeps moving and you can't change like certain actions, and if you want to like make those corrections, right? And that's when I think like you tend to like correct those mistakes in your child and then make a better image of yourself, maybe even better, I would say, something more than your best.
Right. So you think the impulse to the question of parenthood is more about furthering the self.
Right.
Well,
what do you think, Anuj?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been thinking, one is that isn't the parent, or isn't the child the reflection of the parent itself? I mean, like the parent wants to bring up the child as close to him or her as possible. And number two, in the process of bringing up a child, the father also kind of realizes about oneself, all the time. And that kind of boils down to this very kind of known quote of "child is the father of a man," or or I think it's a dialectical process, because reflection is what is reflection? Reflection is basically coming out of yourself to see a part of you, or kind of coming out of yourself to be able to understand what is you. So in that sense, I think it is going to be a part of you. Now, in this case, in the case of parenthood, it is both. It is biological as well as it is psychological. So I think, for example, does a mother make a child, or does the child make the mother? I think in the process of both making each other, they are forming each other, and so they are reflecting upon each other in the process of making each other. So I think it's a dialectical process. So it is very difficult to kind of answer whether first of all, I have for all this while I've been thinking about the should, but isn't everyone a parent in the sense that one is constantly learning and teaching each other?
So you're saying in the performance of being one of the duality of with your own parent.
Yeah.
One is already parenting the parent, and in that
Right.
sense, assuming that role.
Right.
What was the question again? Sorry, I completely. I think there were so many parental conversation that happened. I actually lost the track of the first. What was the question? Prayas, can you repeat?
Can we reflect on whether everyone should be a parent? Please answer this question taking on the persona of your own parent as well.
Well, it's kind of funny because I would like to be a parent if actually it gives me a kind of a leeway from my midlife crisis. You know, it can just be like a negotiation that I can become a parent so that I don't have this midlife crisis kind of conversation with people. Listen, I have a kid, and you know I can just chill out, and the people will not ask me about, oh, what, you're old now and stuff like that. You know, so things can be funny like that. I mean to say that the reflection in terms of reflection of being a parent for me personally may be just that, because of thinking about, okay, certain questions you're not being asked because you're a parent. Okay, and at the same time I actually agree with some of what being said about, yeah, parent, basically the parents try to project images of what they couldn't be onto the children often. But I'm not very sure whether it's the reflection of their own selves in a way, but it's maybe kind of both analysis of their own self, at the same time extending what their self could be, which they could not achieve, but perhaps they can achieve in another image. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, for me, what Anuj was proposing actually, that it was actually, I think, combining all these perspectives that we have shared, that the role of the parent is not necessarily linked to parenthood. So he was proposing, as far what I could gather, that you placing yourself in the duality, you parent the parent, and so that makes it not necessary for you to think of.
But then parent the organizing principle, you know, just abstract it completely. If you say something, for example, no, you have the master server, or think about the parent server, and you think then the parent is the organizing principle through which, of course, there are many organizing principles. I'm not saying there's one parent, but then can we abstract it into a level where you think of it as the organizing principle?
Yeah, not as an organizing principle, but as a, what Anuj was saying, as basically more of a dialogical process with that that basically initiates a kind of back and forth.
You mean teaching and learning, or teaching each other?
Teaching and learning. So what we had Uttam say, as I think Uttam or Malvika was saying, that about nurturing. So about nurturing and being nurtured, right? So those are roles which one are interchangeably played by, a child and parent-child. So I mean,
but what is your experience as a parent? Also, would be interesting.
I mean, my own experience as a parent is actually very close to this, and that's why maybe it makes sense to me, in the sense that I don't think I'm successful in setting out an example at the time, which is what the expectation is of the parent, that you're kind of captaining the ship, or as far as the child is concerned, you are the one who is going to set the example or set the perimeters of what can be imagined. I mean, find it perfectly reasonable to actually accept that I'm not able to do that, and maybe I just allow I mean, I can easily imagine that my child to be going outside the bounds of my imagination.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I also feel that like the question, like the immediate response to the question, should everyone be a parent, for me is no, because parenthood can be a very institutionalizing process, or an institutional kind of process. The parent might, and it can be just a one-way kind of imparting of whatever values, knowledge, and in that sense it is always backward looking. And I don't know if parenthood should be about that. Like it's very ironical that that we always learn things from our parents to be able to perform for the future. So I don't know if that is necessarily productive.
Right.
But even though it's not productive, personally, if I was to think, then that's personal. A lot of it is the first school. I actually agree with you when you say that, it's in a way, I'm not saying counterproductive, but it's like almost instituting a one-way knowledge. You're always looking from the above to the down in terms of your gaze, and then trying to institute your knowledge that you consider noble to be somebody else's, and they have to take it on board as
Exactly.
noble and the way to go ahead.
Yeah.
But that's what Trias was actually trying to say, that, and I will say that I won't say that everybody. I would actually say that everybody should be a parent, because there's something that you get parent, because you can parent an idea for all.
What if you don't want to?
I'm also wondering if it's there's a tendency to do it, to become a parent sometimes even without knowing you're a parent.
Yeah, Malvika, I think I agree with you that we all learn from parenting, and I strongly feel that you don't need another person to be parenting. I think you can parent yourself. And once you've learned to parent yourself, then in my personal opinion, is one ready to parent somebody else.
No, but why should you have to parent anything?
Right.
Yeah.
But in that case, sorry.
I think
Because
parenting.
see, if I answer this question from my parents' perspective, they would say that it's an individual's choice. Should everybody be a parent? Then my parents would say, "Ki, it's your choice. We cannot dictate anything to anybody." And if you ask me, I would go in a radical direction where I attack the word should. For me, it's like too much imposition.
It's too much of a social code. You have to, as if that's the only a way of giving back, or like contributing. Not giving back, but contribution of some kind.
I mean,
is it looked at as contribution, or is it merely looked at as?
Having.
If you take it as an abstract level of care.
Yeah, I see what you're saying when you talk about parenting an idea. I absolutely see it, like that caring, right? That sort of those nurturing, that sense of taking care of something.
You're creating an artwork. You're also parenting, like Kritika says yourself. You're paying attention to details, not necessarily trying to shape it in one particular vision or one particular way, but it's more of an exploration.
Yeah, and you're sensitive to it. You're opening yourself up to it. You're opening your vulnerability to it.
Yeah. I don't look at it as a one-way thing of feeding information and trying to say this is how things should be, but I see it more as an exploration of maybe finer nuances of one's own self.
Yeah, I hear you. I just still feel that whether I should be parenting even myself, or whether anyone should be, that's really up to them. And
Yeah, that is true. Maybe should is a kind of a harsh word.
It's a polarizing word, yeah.
Yeah, the should go away, and then we should only define parent, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, in our formulation, it was we chose that word. Consciously, because we wanted to see where which side of the divide you would place yourself on. So Satya, would you like to take over from here for the?
Okay, that sounds good. We'll move on to the third question, and the third question is: does self-reflection have any value? So, does self-reflection have any value? And I think I didn't expect, when Dhruv brought up the point whether self-reflection is even possible. So if it's not even possible, what is the meaning of value?
Yeah, the question, if you look at it from that point of view, becomes an oxymoron, right? Yeah, if self-reflection has value, then you need to be able to identify the self in question, and
Right.
if it has no value, then you automatically but then it doesn't exist.
But then if I were to say, what if I say that the trial of self-reflection, maybe that has value, does it?
Yeah, the process of attempting it. Maybe.
Yeah, the process of attempt, yes. Does that have any value?
Yeah, I would say that certainly has value. Though if that has value if that holds any merit for achieving self-reflection or not, I'm not sure, but value inherently as a process, yes, definitely.
Right. So what kind of value do you think that has?
I think one, because self-reflection is a retrospective act, it forces you to put experiences in a particular order and then try and build on them and keep doing that iteratively. So it's like a data repository system, sort of something that refreshes your database and then reassembles it.
Yeah, and you're able to attenuate your behavior or recalibrate it or something.
Yeah, like a reset point.
But then Abhay had also mentioned about how there is a constant process of self-reflection going on. I can see the value. I can see from that perspective, you're able to, in the moment, try to make yourself have a better response. But what I was also thinking was, if you spend your energy as a counterpoint to constantly observe what you're doing, aren't you confusing yourself? Or is there not a danger of confusing yourself?
I mean, we all have confusions, but we do grow from it. And we, if the question is that should I be reflecting when I'm conversation, I mean that's a very natural thing, I would say, because your brain works that way. Your brain will take in stuff and process it, reflect it, and then bring it out from your mouth.
Why do you think the brain does that?
I think that's a very natural thing we do. We think because our brain thinks. So it's a constant process. We just keep on thinking. The moment we become, even when we are unconscious, our brain is constantly working, right?
Yeah.
So I think. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I guess if we imagine that a natural process such as the brain doing this thing constantly, it seems to be doing it for a good reason, and therefore it does have a value. In that sense, if we were to just observe nature, there does seem to be a value to self-reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our own self-identity, all our experiences, all our reflections, I mean, that's what we have done till now. And that's what we are capable of doing, and that's what we keep on doing.
Yeah, so if we even take away, if we even consider the question whether self-reflection is possible or not, the attempt to self-reflect will, to some degree, make you consider yourself, even if that is not self-reflection, even if that is what we were talking about earlier, an externalization of yourself in some way, even then what Abhay is saying is even in that form it has value.
Right, right. Now, I think there is a balance.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Kritika. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, Satya, the minute you ask this question to yourself, does self-reflection have any value? Then I'm wondering if the self-reflection already is biased because you're trying to find a value in your reflection. So
I mean, that's
it's not
why
going
we
to
all
be.
are here.
Sorry, what did you say?
I'm sorry, Abhay, I didn't get it.
I'm sorry to cut you, but I just I was saying that's why we all are here to reflect our thoughts and reflect what we think.
Okay, but the minute we attach a value, don't you think like already the idea of value and evaluation and a price or some sort of a commercialization, if we try to put it in terms of material ways, makes us think on a different level than just saying it, do it for just doing its sake and not because it's valuable or has any value. So won't that already alter the whole process?
That's very true. You're observing the observer, and by doing so, you are interfering with the process.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But if it were sorry.
No, go ahead.
But if it were a detrimental process, if it were a process of interference, then it would not. It would neither happen naturally nor happen continuously, and that is something I think we all agree does happen. I mean, people do self-reflect, and it would at least biologically be considered ridiculous to do that, which it is not. So it inherently has. It inherently seems to have value, even if just in the biological chain of things.
But I would think that self-reflection at least.
I think the only thing I would argue is that.
Okay.
No, go ahead, Aditya.
No, I was just saying, considering coming from the artistic context, I think one of the biggest trajectories of thinking, and in that way, aesthetic value to think per se, is actually created a lot with self-reflection, whether it be in drama, poetry, or in visual art. If you come to say a certain form of self-reflection and the image that they generate with the self-reflection was so central to I would say a lot of modernist practitioners in that way. So that way there is a history of people who has taken self-reflection as the fundamental creative drive, no? So
right, so in that sense there's a value of that sort where there is a creative
there's a historic
potential.
value already to it.
Yeah.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if the self even exists without reflection, like aren't we just a sum of our reflections? Like because it is only reflection that affirms the self. We exist only in our reflections. Do we exist other?
Maybe we do, maybe we don't. We exist to ourselves in our own self-reflection, perhaps.
Right. And it's so I was just thinking that because it is our reflections that constitute us. Otherwise, yes, there's the question of the being, but is there the notion of the self in just being?
So you're saying that without self-reflection, there is not even a being for myself, which means if having that process happen has an inherent value to me for defining or for even being aware of myself.
Yeah.
So I would go to an extent to say that the reflection is the process through which the fiction called the self is generated.
It's created. Right. Yeah.
So it's basically that. Basically, you have to produce a fiction of the self. That and I would say reflection is a process through which the fictional existence of this is being produced and reproduced and regenerated in different forms.
But Aditya, then I'll ask you, is there any point in generating the self? Is there any value to that?
Well, I would go back to what I said at some point, because sometimes the reproduction and the regeneration becomes inevitable. You actually have no choice. It's the most intuitive capacities through which you work, because it's not like a choice of taking up a job or not taking up a job. It's the
The
question,
process.
it's the process of the intuitive response to something that will actually guide to reflect on the self, which is not sometimes you're very conscious of. Sometimes you're very conscious of, maybe you have that, maybe in a public context like this, we are actually talking about self in a more composed way. But
Right.
actually, when the reflection happens, it might just be a momentary intuitive response to something, or general response to like a context that you approach. But I'm not very sure whether you always have the choice of going into it and not going into it. That's the trick.
Right. So it's not even a question of whether there's a value or not. Really, it's happening, and that's just how it is.
But I would link back to what Dhruv was saying earlier, that if there was no value, then it wouldn't be happening at all. So, because if you think of actions and processes that happen within ourselves in a kind of economical sense, why would a process happen or survive or sustain if there were no value in it?
Exactly. Like why is the brain self-reflecting? Seems to be some evolutionary value to it, so it's there.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
No, there is definitely an evolutionary and a creative value, because I think the if you even look at literature or other thing, somewhere the reflection of the self is always presumed to be the more authentic.
Right. Yeah.
Somewhere an author who is talking about his self, nobody actually questions him whether it's the truth or whether the truth is a fiction.
Right.
There is an understood fact, as if he is talking about himself, that maybe it's the truth.
The authenticity of it,
The authenticity of it, and sometimes self-reflective kind of tendency makes it way more authentic than actually. Of course, history does it partly, but in a kind of an emotional, at the same time personal way. If you want to see, it has a very interesting authenticity attached to it.
Yeah,
it's like
whether it truly is or isn't, it has the appearance of it at least.
Like the self-portrait, for instance.
Right. Yeah, you're sort of opening
yourself up. But if it's not in that direct process of self-reflection, because at the moment of doing the self-portrait, you're not really self-reflecting. It's a different state of mind. You're not so conscious of the reflection.
You're more self-reproducing, I would say, right, in a portrait rather than reflecting, no?
It's more surface-like.
Yeah, I wonder. I actually don't know what happens.
And it might be different for different approaches, right? Like for somebody who's looking at themselves in a mirror, they might be considering themselves in a different way, not just the surface, but they could be confronting themselves.
Yeah, there's also this aspect of representation and expression, because I see that with art, when you're actually making a work of art, the expression is not very consciously self-reflective. You are... I'm not sure if that the level of consciousness of that self-reflection is really happening. You're reflecting, yes, but I don't know how much you're focusing on that self all the time. You're reflecting on many things, and the self
at the same time,
finds its way. Yeah, it gets shaped through that.
Yeah, and that's the image that comes out eventually on the canvas.
Yeah. Also, but that might just be the reflection. Might be just the trigger that systemizes into certain language codes as we speak.
True.
Yeah, it can just become like, I want to reflect, but the way I would like to reflect is to write a novel or make a painting. But since the virtue of the codes and languages, these things are thing, it might actually take that reflection into a completely, even sometimes counter to what I was actually imagining.
Yeah, exactly. And the self is there right through that process, but you're not always conscious of it.
Conscious of it. That's for sure.
But the self is also constantly mutating, and it's not a monolithic entity, no? It's not neither a homogeneous thing.
It's a fragmented entity, I would say.
Yeah. And that makes, I mean, that's why I feel all the more that without reflection, the self cannot be deciphered, because it's a continuous kind of changing arc.
Without reflection, the self cannot be deciphered. Therefore, can we say that the value of reflection is to decipher the self? There is a value in that.
Yeah, yeah.
Perhaps.
I wanted to get into sort of the opposite question of too much self-reflection, which can lead to self-doubt, but we are at 4:40 p.m. or sorry, it's 8:10 or whatever in India. I guess it's time for us to wrap up, yeah?
Yeah. No, I was just some comments that we will be getting in touch with each of you individually to just have a brief conversation about how this experience was, because like you mentioned, we are writing about this this process in our essay, so we would like to maybe set a time with each of you individually in the coming week, and then maybe have a brief conversation.
Okay.
So thanks everyone for joining, and I think we'll wrap up the discussion here.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.